I want to note that I see Manassas City Police Chief Deane here, and also some members and former members of the Prince William County Police Department, and maybe other law enforcement officers here. And also some of Judge Willett's colleagues are in the audience from both the bench and from the Bar Association. So thank you all for coming. As already noted, Paul Ebert will not be with us today. He's recovering from recent surgery. Paul has, however, provided slides from a prior presentation he made, and he's dispatched his former assistant, and now retired Judge James Willett, to discuss the sniper prosecution. Thank you, Paul, and best wishes, and he will be watching this videotape, so we're going to behave ourselves. Turning to our program, retired Chief Deane, I call him Charlie, will discuss phase one, the investigation that led to the apprehension of the Beltway Snipers. Then former Commonwealth's attorney and retired Supreme Court Judge Willett, I call him Jim for this seminar only, will discuss phase two, the prosecution of the snipers. As we begin, I want to ask you, how many of you stopped for gas this week? When you stopped, how many of you worried about your safety as you used the pump more than the cost per gallon? Without lead, over 23 years have passed from that month of fear in 2002. Charlie, please take us back to that time.
Well, we'll see what we can do. See what we can do about that. Get the mic in here. But what I would like to do is tell you Prince William's perspective, my perspective as police chief, and also give you a flavor of what was going on in the region at the time this case unfolded. So the first shootings, the first phase of this is we were all in shock when these shootings started occurring. There were 6 random sniper cases that involved deaths. There was a 7th case. The first case was at Michael's store in suburban Maryland, where a shot went into the front of the business and barely missed a clerk. But after that, between the 2nd and 3rd of October, we had 6 murders in suburban Maryland and 1 in DC. The things that I would like to mention about those cases is, it may not be, sadly as it is, may not have been absolutely unheard of to have 6 murders in that period of time in the Washington metropolitan area. But the thing that was different in these is that they were random cases. They were victims that appeared to be low-risk victims, not victims that were involved in, drug dealing or something like that. These people were, someone was mowing a yard near a shopping center, someone was filling gas, a vehicle with gas, a taxi cab. Someone else was walking down the street, someone was waiting for someone to pick them up. And in the DC case, there was a man that was just walking down the street when he was shot. And in that case, one thing that I point out, although white vans were seen in all of the cases, in the DC case, the man was shot and killed, and a vehicle that was seen leaving there was described as a Chevrolet Caprice, and that was leaving slowly with the lights off. So that was something that was interesting, that was different than the other cases, but the white van prevailed in other cases. So then on October the 4th, a similar case happened in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, which added concern for the Virginia authorities and the region. Of course, we'll show you a map later, but the region was expanding at that time. Our initial responses from a law enforcement executive perspective of trying to plan with this was we were trying to figure out how to exchange information. We were coming off of the 9/11 attack, terrorism attack at the Pentagon in New York. So the police chiefs and the law enforcement community in the region was pretty well locked together in our relationships and our investigation of things that were going on and communicating regularly with conference calls. So we just implemented that on a more intense basis once these sniper cases started coming. And we would talk about, as the individual cases occurred, we talked about what new information was developed. And I'll show you a map later where every time we had a case, additional case, I had a map put on my desk that was updated with the details we had. And I'm sure all jurisdictions did the same thing. So we talked about the vehicles that could be involved, and white vans were involved in all cases, of course. It appeared, was witnessed, and then we talked about the evidence and what kind of weapon we thought it was. And eventually those analysis showed that they were the same weapon was used in all cases. At that point, the pattern was clear that we were only having incidents every few days, but they were only on weekdays. So we developed a response time a response plan as to how we would be handling evidence, how we would be handling the media, who's in charge, where the evidence is going to go, who's going to actually process the evidence. And we didn't get to the point of thinking about where this case will be prosecuted, but all of us on a local level, even though we had lots of federal participation, FBI was doing a great job, ATF and other agencies, we knew that this was, that someday it was going to boil down to be a murder case in a local jurisdiction that would always have the authority to do prosecution. So we treated it like those other hundreds of murder cases that we'd had. We know what we're doing when we investigate violent crime. We have outstanding crime scene search capabilities. And so we figured out kind of how we were going to divvy out the work responsibility, how we were going to deal with tracking down leads, who would handle what leads, how we would coordinate those things. And the FBI came on with a lot of data resources, tip lines and things like that. So basically, I'm going to show a diagram here in a second, but one of the things we talked about, of course, was these are bad people. They have heavy weapons. So we talked a lot about officer safety, trying to be as careful as we could, and making sure officers were well prepared. So then on October the 7th, Monday, October the 7th, we had this child shot in Prince George's County, Maryland. Clearly a sniper-related case. So at that point, it threw it into another gear of fear in the community. The fear was that every parent that was frightened for themselves and frightened from going to gas pumps and being in public, the fear then was all children in all schools are at risk. So on October the 9th, we had a case in Prince William County. Mr. Harold Myers was shot at the Sunoco station near Route 234 and 66. I'll show you a map of that. And this to work without blinding Sharon. Yeah. So this is Bob Evans.
On the right.
That's on the side of Route 234. 66 is down this way. This is 234 Sudley Road. This is the service station where the shooting occurred. This was a restaurant at that time called the City Grill. So, I mean, that comes in, the city grill comes into play in that we read witnesses' statements that someone was coming out of that place, that restaurant, man and his child, I think, and when he heard the gun go off. So we used that a little bit to try to figure out where the shot had been taken from. But overall, everyone in this area had heard a large blast. So imagine this as a crime scene. A man is shot and killed right there doing pumping gas. You knew you had a loud sound. You knew it was a standoff weapon, but he could have been shot from anywhere around there. So we had lots of experts from around the country and on TV, and everybody figured out that they knew where it came from. And as the investigation developed, and we can tell you more later, it turns out that the shot was fired from Bob Evans' parking lot, right over there. They pulled that, they backed that car in and then shot at where we should.
The next one shows a little better.
Okay, here's Bob Evans. This is the other side, looking from Bob Evans to the Sunoco station. So the shot was fired from over in here in that parking lot, at the trunk of that car, over to here. And we actually found, Jim will talk about some evidence that we found later at that scene. So to go on about kind of what their response was, we realized that how important it was to have planned how we were going to deal with this evidence and how we were going to deal with the scene itself. By this time, we knew that I was convinced, that most of us were convinced that we had the information in our file somewhere that people had in people's car, descriptions or whatever, but we just couldn't figure out who they were. So we wound up saying that night, the only order that I gave that night when I was informed of this case is, regardless of how big this crime scene is, I want you to double it. I want the supervisor to double the crime scene. So we literally shut down the 66 exit down about a half a mile west of, east on Southern Road. So we knew we had, if someone hadn't gotten over there by that, right away, we had people within that perimeter. Regardless of that, we did not apprehend them that night. I realized right away, although we had not analyzed the bullets, of course, this had to be part of the pattern. So we had notified the sniper task force. We had lots of resources. Chief Skinner came, Manassas police sent folks, state police had lots of people, and people from the region, many command post vehicles. And ours was the oldest. It was an old antique bus that we had gutted and remodeled. It had a new engine on it. And it literally caught fire that night. So we had to abandon that and go to a motel right next to it. So that's what happened, best plans, you still have things go bad. But we had all the command people that arrived that was interested, and we discussed what we knew, but Prince William was in charge of the evidence. We collected the evidence, and then by plan, we turned that over to the FBI lab and to the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm Lab, was the firearm part of that. We maintained the perimeter for a long time and methodically talked to people and let them go out and search some vehicles. But we actually, had the sniper car go right out at that time. He was within their perimeter, but an officer talked with him that didn't realize, didn't have enough information to suspect him of being, they were just somebody that was had been in the Bob Evans parking lot. It's been a customer. And you don't know how important small things are, but Tom Mayhew, who was the chief in Fairbanks County, had not had a shooting at that time, but was, a team member working on these cases like all of us in the region. And I called Tom from the scene that night and suggested that he have some of his detectives come down and actually, observe and know as much as they could know about this case. And just a couple of days later, Tom had a shooting up at the Home Depot at 7th Corners. And he said that was important. Of course, in these scenes, you have lots of people that have lots to say, but you have to control the chaos by having an incident command where you try to speak with one voice. So we had the commanders were in charge of different aspects of, like we do, just divvying out the responsibilities. One of the smart things we did that night was have staging areas for the incoming outside officers and detectives and agents. And then you designate responsibilities. From a media standpoint, of course, by this time, there's so much fear in the community. This was 24-hour news coverage, national news coverage. So we had lots of media respond with the cameras and the boom trucks. And if we had not controlled it, we'd have 3 or 4 helicopters zooming over at all time. So we restricted their space, and that helps because what happens in all these cases, you have those helicopters over here, you can't hear yourself think because there's just so much noise. It's a distraction. It's not that you're trying to conceal anything, it's just a distraction, so it makes sense to keep them out. And by planning, as far as we were concerned, we decided to have our one press conference in the middle of the night, and about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I met with the press and told them what we knew at that point. We didn't know for sure it was a sniper case, but it looked like it. Then we'd have one more press conference, and that would be the next day, whenever we determined for sure by physical evidence, by bullets basically, that this was related to all those other cases. We did that. We had that on the east end of the county at Ferlazzo Building, 2 or 3 o'clock the next afternoon. And from then on, they were trying to get us to do interviews, but we by planning, we turned all the media back to the Rockville task force that was in the primary investigative task force in Rockville, headed by Chief Moose of Montgomery County Police and Gary Ball with the FBI and Mike Bouchard with ATF. So that was our way of controlling that media issue so that we could get on with those work. So this is a picture of the scene there at the local station that night. And I don't see my car there, but if we have time later, I'll tell you a funny story about my car. They always say the chief violates all the rules. So the investigation part of this, you have to designate who's overall in charge. So we had folks that were leading the crime scene and coordinating with the federal agencies as we had planned. We used the recruit class to do like inch by inch search around the potential locations of where the shots had come from. That happened to include the Bob Evans parking lot, which we did not know was the place that they shot from. But in the Bob Evans parking lot, I think is where we found the map. But there was a map that wound up with being found in that area that wound up having the prints on it of these people. This is an example of the agencies that were involved in the task force that was in the investigative stage of this. Of course, Rockville, the Maryland task force, had a similar composition of Maryland police agencies and federal agencies. And we saw Maryland as the lead agency in helping in coordination. But we handle leads here, and we're very careful to coordinate, make sure that we didn't duplicate a lot. So this is an example of an attempt to show how the organizational chart was supposed to flow. And as you can see, as shootings went on down at Ashland and other places in Virginia, the Richmond area developed their own task force at Fort Hagen. One issue you have in these kind of cases is you can have people getting excited and thinking they have a hot lead and it's not in their kind of area of responsibility, and they go over the line and don't coordinate. And if those things happen, they can be dangerous. It can cause a lot of duplication, et cetera. So we were very careful from a command standpoint to not allow that to happen. We had a couple incidents where people didn't properly orient other people for what they were doing. For example, if somebody came down from Maryland or some FBI task force member took it upon themselves, or some federal task force member took it upon themselves to do some search or something without coordination, we made sure we didn't have to repeat that kind of thing. Then we had a second shooting in Spotsylvania. And we developed the pattern that these cases were near the interstate. Most of the cases were not just off the interstate at Spotsylvania Mall and at Ponderosa and near Ashland. So, and in our case, it was close to the interstate. So the analysis was that we needed to do more. I skipped over that. This is basically more information about traffic flow, the lead information. Of course, you had a massive amount of tips that came in, and the FBI did a great job of assisting in managing those leads. On the 13th, on Sunday, we started developing a surveillance plan that led to a plan that we were designating for surveillance with SWAT teams which had members of the FBI, SWAT type trained people, and U.S. Marshal Service, and our officers. All of these teams would have one of the Prince William officers with them. They would set up surveillance on the most likely places that there'd be another shooting. And at that point, we thought it was going to be near an interstate exchange, probably a service station. So we had all of the intersections, exchanges that we could covered by teams that were ready to apprehend the individuals and anticipating getting in a gunfight with these people. Same time, we came up with a plan to have our police officers, because I was convinced we were going to have a police officer shot next. They had somebody shot in school, kid at school, and all these other people shot. And the shootings were continuing, so I was convinced we were going to have a police officer shot. So we directed that officers on routine calls during the time we had these surveillances, starting that following Monday. When we had routine calls in the area that was under surveillance, officers would go in and handle the call, and not stay any longer than necessary and get out of the area, because we didn't want officers being a target, being exposed to that. We had 100 and some people at the briefing as we started talking about this plan, and we were implemented on that Monday and did implement it. And we talked about the issue of friendly fire. We had lots of people, federal agents being paired with Prince William officers in a high-risk environment. We were concerned about having friendly fire where a SWAT team shoots at a SWAT team thinking they're the bad guy. So we talked about how undercover officers should identify themselves if there's any question. Of course, we know how much, all of you, most of you were here during that time, so you know how much fear there was in the community. And as far as the school's concerned, I talk with Dr. Ed Kelly every day. We discussed strategies and what he was thinking about doing, and and kind of where we were in the investigation, and what the patterns were looking like. And Ed and the school board decided to stop any outside activities, including, sports activities. So the big, and I think the park authority did the same thing. So it was a big impact on the community, but I think people understood that it was a necessary thing. This is just an example of, something that was in the paper that then, when you have a tough guy that has a gun and he's still frightened, it just kind of says what happened, what the environment was at the time. So this map is one that I had, I think, on my desk today that after our shooting. So let me just go over a little bit of this. So after our shooting, Fairfax County had the shooting up at Seven Corners at the Home Depot. Mrs. Franklin, who was a FBI analyst, was there, so she was shot in the parking garage there. Clearly a sniper case. So we had these cases, the original group of cases in Maryland, and the one in DC, then the middle school in Prince George's County. Then there was one in Spotsylvania Mall, and then one in Ashland at the restaurant there, Ponderosa, and Prince William's case. So even though to put it back in chronological order, kind of, even though we set up on the 95, 66 interchanges, we set up surveillance, et cetera, and special responses to those areas. After we did that, the next case was up in Fairfax and Seven Corners at the Home Depot, which was off the interstate, of course. And then the next one was down in Ponderosa in Ashland, which was out of that area where we'd set up those surveillances. So it was a good plan, but it did not end in the arrest. The white vans continued to be seen and in these cases. And then, so this is a timeline of all of the cases. The final case was the case in Aspen Hill, Maryland, where a bus driver was shot and killed. And then on the 24th was when the apprehension was made. So that's 22 days of fear and concern. The only thing I'll say about this, the apprehension, and Jim will talk about the prosecution, et cetera, is that on the night in question, you think things are simple, but when you have feds and locals and state governments and state jurisdictions and multiple jurisdictions like this, it can get complicated, as simple decisions can be complicated. If this was a Prince William case, I'd just say this is the way we're going to handle it. But when you're in a regional situation, it's different. people have different laws, they have different perceptions. So the issue that I'm talking about is, once the individual was identified, these individuals, Muhammed and Malvo, were identified through fingerprints and because they were in the mouth and just different things that led to them being identified. And the car being identified, and the tag number being identified. Once we had that information, our time here, that was, I'm thinking it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Later, I'm on a conference call, and the decision is being bandied about as to whether we're going to release that information that night or not. Now think about it. We have all these shootings, all this going on, and it boils down to, strategically, should we release this information and hopefully add to the likelihood that somebody will spot them? Or is that going to warn them and they are going to abandon the car and, get on a plane or something? And then there was an issue about, one of them was a juvenile. And there were some federal folks on there that basically didn't know how to handle the juveniles. I said, on my 2 cent worth on the call was, I think I can get a warrant or detention order for the juvenile in about 5 minutes. But it's real complicated because they don't handle juveniles. So it's just interesting the issues that can be issues. So at some point a study was done after action. You're welcome to borrow one of these books that talks about multiple jurisdictions that were involved in this and what was done right and maybe what was done wrong, but overall very positive. So I put that book there. The second phase of what we do as the police department was assisting Mr. Ebert in the Illinois Attorney's Office in once these people have been arrested, in preparing for court. Much of the investigation happens after an arrest. And we had the best Illinois Attorney's Office in the country. Paul Ebert's one of the most experienced in the country, and certainly has a great track record, but still it's a lot of work. And of course, Fairfax had Bob Moran, who's an outstanding prosecutor. So this region is very fortunate at that time to have such good prosecutors. And so we, as a police department, did what we could to assist the prosecutor's office. And I have a story that I will tell at some point if time permits.
Shall we turn it now over to
Yes,
Jim
indeed.
Willett? And there's some seats over here if you all would like to have a seat. As Jim's taking the mic.
Okay. Folks, thank you for having me. I'm a trial lawyer, so I need to stand up when I talk.
Get paid for it.
I really appreciate you having us here today. It was a challenging prosecution, to say the least. We had a total of 15 shootings, 10 of which were homicides, and as Charlie indicated, they ranged from upstate Maryland down to Hanover County. So there were a lot of jurisdictions that were involved. We had no eyewitnesses. Nobody saw anybody pull a trigger or possess a gun or fire a weapon. There were no incriminating statements from either of the defendants. They made no admissions. And so we had to build the case strictly on circumstantial and forensic evidence. And Charlie had mentioned the expertise of the crime scene technicians. I can't overemphasize how important they were. We worked with different crime scene technicians for each individual county or city where a shooting took place. Every single one of them was as professional and had executed their duties with expertise second to none. And that was important because all of the evidence against these individuals was physical evidence, scientific evidence. And so the evidence had to be collected perfectly, preserved perfectly, stored perfectly, transported perfectly, analyzed perfectly, or there was no case. One of the problems that we had was we didn't know who pulled the trigger. And the reason that was a problem was because of what was colloquially known in Virginia at the time as the trigger man rule. It's somewhat of a misleading title, but basically the concept is, in order to be eligible for the death penalty, you have to be actual participant in the shooting, so that if two people rob a bank and one of them shoots the teller, both can be prosecuted for capital murder, but only the shooter is eligible for the death penalty. And we didn't know who the shooter was, had no way to determine who the shooter was, but it was pretty important for us at the time to get the death penalty eligible for Mr. Muhammad. And so Paul asked me to do some research, and in doing that, I learned that the term trigger man was a bit of a misnomer. In order to be eligible for the death penalty, you had to be an actual participant. And typically, that's the shooter. But for example, if Charlie and I wanted to kill somebody and he held that person down and I beat that person over the head with a rock, we would both be actual participants and both act eligible for the death penalty. But presented with this legal obstacle, Paul started doing research about how snipers operate. And he learned that snipers operate usually in a team. There is a shooter and there is a spotter. And through the good offices of Charlie, he was able to make the acquaintance of a British Army sniper who educated all of us about how sniper teams work, and they do work in a team. And really, according to Mark Spicer, who was the British Army sniper that worked with us and testified in the case, the spotter was even more important than the shooter, because the spotter has multitasks. He has to make sure that the target is available, he has to make sure that the scene is clear, he has to make sure that nobody is watching them, and he tells the shooter when to take the shot. So through that theory that Paul developed, we were able to establish for the court's satisfaction and the jury's satisfaction that both these individuals were actual participants and eligible for the death penalty. And so we were very fortunate to have that. And as Charlie says, once the arrests are made, it's not the end of the investigation. The investigation continued for an entire year until the cases were tried in November and December in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, Virginia, because the judge changed venue. So that added a whole new layer of logistical challenges for us, because we not only had to coordinate hundreds of witnesses, there were 500 exhibits introduced into evidence in this case. We had to coordinate all that, and we had to do it in a foreign venue. Paul tasked Rick Conway and me with preparing the cases, and he basically divvied them out like cards. Rick had responsibility for so many, I had responsibility for so many, and we put them on one after another as individual, as we would do an individual murder case. So Rick would try murder case 1 in front of the jury, and I would try murder case 2, and so on and so forth until we got through them. Paul supervised this entire thing. He decided that I was going to do the opening statement. Rick was going to do the closing argument, and he was going to save the last word for himself, doing the rebuttal to sum things up at the very end. And it worked out well for us. We had, as I say, great help from a lot of people. It was a total team effort. There was a task force set up in Centerville where basically Rick and I lived there for a year, going up there, completing our tours here in Prince William, and then shooting up into Centerville to work with the task force where we had, perhaps 30 people from all the different jurisdictions, including the FBI, the DEA, the ATF. We had unlimited resources, which was something new for me. As a state prosecutor, the feds came in and said, whatever you want, you can have. And so it became like children in a candy store. We started developing interesting demonstrative exhibits. As you see there, for example, we actually Sharon, go back.
You want to go back, sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead. First.
That is not the car. That is an identical car that the federal authorities found somewhere in a used car lot somewhere, I don't know. And we brought it into the courtroom and recreated the case, the car that they used for the shootings, because they used that trunk as their sniper hide. They cut out a piece in the back of the trunk for them to put the barrel of the weapon through, and took their shots from there, so they were completely concealed. I think we have a
Yeah, we
video
do.
which
I'm just trying to get
recreates
that for you.
how that was done.
Lauren, I may need you to,
Maybe we don't.
we do have it, yeah. Yeah, I just need to get it to load.
So what they did was the shooter would hide in the trunk. He would point the barrel of the gun out of the back of the trunk where they cut a place, and here's the video. The shooter would get in the back seat. You could pop that back seat out with a button, raise it up, and that would give him full access to the trunk. We played this video for the jury.
And in their case, they would have been at Bob Evans, pulled in there, right?
Right,
Back in.
back into the Bob evidence. If you look at that barrel, it's extremely difficult to see. All that gives it away is that brief puff of smoke. That's in slow motion. And you can't tell because of the echo where the sounds come from, especially at an intersection like 234 and 66 there. And so nobody saw what happened. And that was our challenge.
You want to run through it again, or you just,
Sure.
it's pretty compelling reenactment.
No one said that they thought they heard it at Bob Evans either, did they? You know, it was just interesting. Yeah. There's so much noise.
And the key to the entire case was that rifle. It was linked ballistically to all the homicides. And Charlie mentioned that there was an issue before they were apprehended about how much information to release to the public. We had an idea of what car they were using, we had the license plate, we had a description of them, but they had to make a decision as to whether to release that information and get help from the public, or keep it to themselves and perhaps not have that information which led to their capture. Because if that information was released and the snipers learned that we had a description of their car and their license plate number, and they were to get rid of that rifle, there would be no case against them. And so it was quite a difficult decision for the authorities to make. They decided to release the information. And shortly thereafter, someone who was resting in a truck stop at 2 o'clock in the morning on an interstate in Maryland saw the car, called the authorities. The FBI Special Task Force, Terrorism Response Task Force, who are amazing, I would add parenthetically, got up there quickly, made the apprehension, found that weapon in the trunk of the car in the possession of these two individuals. It was linked to the exclusion of every other weapon to the shootings ballistically from rounds that were recovered from each of the murder victims. And that was the entire key to the case, without which the prosecution would not have gone forward.
Jim, do you want to address the notes? In the presentation, there's a picture of a bunch of the notes. What were those?
They left, at different scenes, they left us these notes, which were generally of a taunting nature. They were helpful forensically because in their possession, we found similar paper, similar sticker stars and things like that. We found a receipt from not a department store, but like a large stationery store in Ashland, where a lot of these items had been purchased, and it just helped us further link them through circumstantial evidence to the crimes.
There are in the PowerPoint, there are a number of legal documents. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what is the importance of the instructions that are given to the jury?
Okay, right. We tell the jurors that they are the judges of the facts, but that the law of the case is given to them by the judge. And that law is given to them in what's called jury instructions, which are written statements of the law for the jury to follow. They are read to the jury just before closing arguments, and the jury gets copies of them to take with them into the jury to help them decide what was going on. And they had a lot of things to decide. The first thing they had to decide was guilt or innocence for 15 separate shootings, as I say, 10 of which were homicides. But once they made the decision that they were guilty, we had really a second trial. It's called a bifurcated proceeding on the question of punishment, because at that time, of course, Virginia had capital punishment, and procedurally, it was for the jury to decide if they were eligible for capital punishment. And after having found them guilty, there would be a second trial on the question of punishment, where all new evidence was presented, basically about these individuals, what kind of people they were, whether the crimes themselves were of an aggravated and horrific nature, which would qualify them for the death penalty. And so we really had a second trial where we went into the background of these people, and who they were, who their families were, what impact it had on their families. And one of the things that Charlie mentioned, which I think was very important, is that unfortunately, when you are involved in a murder case, the murder victim is often not the best person in the world. Usually murder victims aren't candidates for citizen of the year. They are fellow criminals, they are drug dealers, where drug dealers call them bad. They are, typically speaking, involved in the criminal element themselves. That was not the case with these people. These were folks just like you and me. They were randomly selected. They weren't selected because they were involved in the criminal element of society. They were selected because they were at a gas pump at the wrong time. And when the case was over and we came back to Prince William, Paul decided he was going to get the victims of all these people together in Prince William and to answer any questions that they had about the prosecution, about what would happen going forward with appeals and things like that. And so they all came down to Prince William County, and we got in a courtroom in circuit court, and there were probably 70 people there, and they were just like us. There were 70 people there, of all different backgrounds, all different races, all different ages, all different occupations. None of them were anything other than ordinary folks, and they were somewhat still in shock about what had happened to their loved ones, but they were also very, very grateful for how the law enforcement authorities handled the cases, and that an apprehension was made and justice was served.
I'm going to bother you one more time. If you can kind of tell us what happened to the Muhammed and Malvo when they were convicted.
Okay, well, Muhammad was...
Mike, please.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Muhammad was given the death penalty and was executed shortly thereafter. Malvo received a life sentence from the jury, a multiple life sentence from the jury. He was prosecuted in Chesapeake by Bob Horan, and can't remember.
Roush, Judge Roush.
Judge Roush was the,
Morrow, Ray Morrow.
Ray Morrow.
Ray Morrow, yeah.
He's a good friend of mine, I couldn't remember his name. It's age. He received multiple life sentences and is still incarcerated.
Okay, Charlie, you want to just reflect a little bit on those that were involved in helping law enforcement as we close this out?
Yes, I mean, you can see these are the most significant agencies, I think. Oh, yeah, okay. FBI played a tremendous role, and the Marshal Service came right in with resources immediately, and then all the local jurisdictions and various other federal agencies, including the Federal Protective Agency, the Secret Service, and other agencies assisted. As far as the Secret Service was concerned, I talked with the Assistant Director of the Secret Service every day. He wanted to know what the latest was, because of course, when you have the shooting going on, sniper shooting going on around the Washington area, there's concern about public officials being shot and the president. So they were very keyed up on that. And it's a great example of how law enforcement agencies can work together, and they need to work together on these multiple jurisdiction cases. I'm sure they're going through some of this down in Tucson, where they're working on that kidnapping case down there. Sometimes you can have friction related to petty politics and jealousy between law enforcement agencies, and it can be counterproductive. But I think all in all, this case was really well handled in a very professional manner.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have some time for questions if the audience has some questions for either. Go ahead, please.
I have two questions. First of all, with respect to Malvo's sentencing, has Malvo had to be resentenced as a result of the Supreme Court's subsequent decision regarding mandatory life sentences for juveniles?
No, because the statutory scheme under which he was sentenced was not affected by that decision.
Okay, my second question was, I assume that all the counts on which he was charged occurred in Virginia, but yet you put in evidence of other murders. I assume there was a motion to exclude that evidence on the basis of the presidential effect outweighed its probative evidence.
It's a very good question, and there was a battle royale on that issue. For those of you who didn't hear, the question was, we introduced evidence of crimes other than Mr. Myers' murder, which we did. We introduced crimes, evidence of all the shootings, and there was a legal battle over whether that evidence could be introduced, evidence of other crimes. Very often, evidence of other crimes is excluded because, as this gentleman has said, its prejudicial impact outweighs its probative value. But there are large exceptions to that rule, and we fell within a number of those exceptions. Common scheme or plan, modus operandi. I won't bore you with the details, but there were 4 or 5 exceptions to that rule into which we squarely fit. The trial court ruled in our favor, and the Supreme Court affirmed that decision.
You know, it might be interesting for you to mention the different cases from the different states that were somewhat tied in. Was there shooting in Tucson or somewhere, and golf course, and then those kind of things, and then the murder at the robbery in Montgomery, Alabama, I believe it was.
Yeah, there was a trail of violence that began in the state of Washington and went to Arizona, went into Louisiana, and then came up and started exploding here in Virginia and Maryland. And a lot of those cases, witnesses from those cases came forward and helped the police put together who these individuals were and maybe how they were traveling and where they were traveling. And Rick and Paul traveled to each of those jurisdictions and interviewed the people out there to make sure that, to make sure that no stone was unturned. And some of those folks ended up testifying, and some of them didn't. But they were all background information to give the jury a picture of how this developed. Because one of the big questions we had was, why was this happening? You know, what was the motive? And you don't have to prove a motive to get a conviction, murder conviction in the United States, and certainly in Virginia. But it's kind of helpful. You know, folks want to know why this was going on. And we never had a definitive answer for that. And in closing argument, both Rick and Paul, I can assure you, emphasized to the jury quite strongly that while it might be nice to have evidence of a motive, evidence of a motive was not legally required. We developed a theory, and it's really nothing more than that, that Muhammad, who was estranged from his wife, wanted to secure custody of his children, was afraid that he wouldn't be able to do so, and that this was nothing more than an elaborate scheme to kill her. And her murder would be just seen as another random shooting in this spate of shootings that took place in a large geographic area. And of course, custody would, by default, fall to him if the child's mother was killed. But I have no evidence of that. That's just a theory, it's just conjecture. And so that was another handicap that we had in this case, along with the absence of eyewitnesses. We had an absence of motive.
Yes, yes,
Which one of us?
right in the Marine sweater.
Thank you for addressing the motive question, because that was actually something I was going to ask about, because I had heard that theory as well. I had a question about, I guess, some of the civil response to the sniper attacks. I heard at the time, gas stations, businesses and stuff were putting up like barriers and like blockades. Can you talk more about that? Like what the sort of response in the community and like on the civil side of things was to these attacks?
I don't know, I'm not familiar with the barriers at the service stations. But we do know that there was a considerable region-wide, local and regional impact, economic impact. And there's a study in that that's talking about millions of dollars. Some of that may have been introduced in court, I don't know. But it was done by the Stephen Fuller with the George Mason University, economist. He did a study about how much impact there was on the region of businesses not being open and people not going out to shop because of fear. There was even they did a study, part of that was something like inattention of people at work. And every time that they calculated, it's fascinating to me to think about how you calculate the economic impact. One of it was the people's inattention at work. Every time they had a shooting, they would calculate that people would be on TV, would be watching TV, regardless of where they were, and making phone calls home and checking on their kids and things. 30 minutes for each case or whatever it was. And then they calculated a time of employees weren't getting work out of them. And so there's some of that going on. And there is a study, I have it here somewhere, that puts a number on it. It's millions of dollars.
Gentleman that asked in the back.
Yeah, I lived through that whole time period too. Was the white van really used, or was the Impala ultimately utilized in all the shootings?
Yes, the Chevrolet was, as far as we know, the Chevrolet was used in all the cases. And the white van was in no way involved, was used by them. And of course, as you think about it, the white vans are everywhere, all the time.
All the time, yes.
And we suspected that as time went on, but that raises the point that I want to make too. The night that we had our shooting, we had my old command bus set up out there, and we had a lot of the bosses in that bus, and we were talking about what we knew, what we didn't know about this case. And one thing I was concerned about from the beginning was that the white van did not exist, was not involved in this case. Because I remember Chuck Ramsey, the chief of DC, asking about this Chevrolet, the scene, the leaving slowly with the lights out in the DC shooting. Anyway, but the white van just kept coming. Every case it kept coming up. So on the night we had our case, I asked our communications, I had somebody go to communications and get the tape. I've forgotten whether they brought the tape or how we did it, and had it played in the command post that night. And to confirm what we know, where did this white van come up? Did it exist? Or what kind of vehicle existed? And the person called in, they called that case in, it was recorded, we played this about 3 o'clock in the morning. And the person was absolutely in panic. So the man has just had his head blown off at the gas pump. You gotta get the police here right now, they're still here. And this white van is just going by right now. And I see the gun barrel. So that convinced us that there must be a white van involved. And so we didn't have any other vehicle involved in our scene. So we just continued to put out information on that white van. And that was the best information we had at that time, I guess.
The lady in front of that gentleman, did you have a question?
No, I'm just gonna comment on the barriers. I was in 7th grade when this happened at Hanover County. And so that's when the letter was found in Ashland in the woods that your children are not safe. So we actually spent a week out of school, and then when we were kind of allowed back into school, they were taking school buses and barricading all entrances to schools.
Oh, wow.
And parents were on volunteer shifts to walk the halls and monitor and make sure things were safe. And I remember at the time, a lot of guidance coming out, if you have to get gas, you are crouching and you are waiting in your car. So there was a lot of like safety protocols being pushed out to the media that you were sort of, and if you saw the white van, you needed to get out of Dodge.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Question, why did he come here? Was it random selection or was it to create more publicity in Washington area? Did it ever come?
He lived in Southern Maryland.
He was from this area, but we have no idea why he targeted it. An interesting aside to the geographic aspect of it was that the court changed venue. Both judges decided to change venue, understandably, because they felt all of us were victims, and there would be victims on the jury. And as Charlie mentioned, an investigation doesn't stop when an arrest is made, and I can tell you that an investigation doesn't stop even when the trial begins. Everybody continues on through all that. And the FBI was still in the process of analyzing the computer that they had in their car, which contained a lot of their plans and a lot of incriminating evidence. And after venue was changed and after we began the trial, the FBI concluded its forensic examination of the computer, wherein there was at least a hint that they had planned to go to the Tide area next. So it was kind of ironic that the judge changed the venue to the area where they were going to visit in the future.
Yes, Chief Keene, you want to close
Just
it down?
a controversial thought process. Fast forward this case to today, with the technology we have and the controversial of license plate readers. How much that would have helped in this case when you had a make, a model, and a tag number of trying to determine potential saving a life, because we would have been able to track them down a little quicker. So as your General Assembly, talks about taking away the use of license plate readers or limiting them. Keep cases like this in mind, because that's what we do in law enforcement, is try to share cases like this of how we could have solved it hopefully sooner than later.
Good point.
Any other questions? Yes, I'm sorry, yes, sir.
The tipster at the Maryland rest stop, was their name ever revealed or is it secret?
The name appears in books.
name was
It's in books.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember the gentleman was traveling for business and he had pulled over to the rest stop to get 40 minutes when suddenly he saw that car and he knew right away what it was from the description of the car and the license tag that had been broadcast on the radio literally just hours before.
Yeah. I remember when they tipped them and the police came, they carved off the whole rest stop because they were afraid he might get out. And then some trucker tried to sneak out, right? He tried to sneak out.
There was a trucker involved, sir, but I don't remember the
Well, if
specifics.
it was just a regular trucker, he wasn't involved, but he knew the police were carting it off. So he tried to get out because he didn't want to wait there for hours.
That's the community, right?
Any other questions to close it out? Yes, sir.
I have a
Last
question. How did you legally establish that the young boy, on a legal basis, was a participant? And I was watching the video. What was he doing in the car at the time of the shooting?
What was Malvo doing?
Say, yeah, how did you establish that the young boy was legally a participant in the crime? He is, what was he doing in the car at the time of the shooting?
Well, we don't know
You
for
don't
sure.
know.
We believe, it's again, just conjecture that Muhammad the adult was the driver and that Malvo, who was physically small, he was a kid, a boy, was the one that was getting in and out of the trunk because it would have been physically easier for him to do it. But I really couldn't tell you who was in the trunk and who was driving at any of the scenes.
So driving the car established him as a legally participant.
Yes, sir.
Any closing comments, gentlemen, and we'll wrap this up. Was there another question? I apologize. Yes, sir.
Given the speculation on Mr. Muhammad's motive, was there any speculation regarding Mr. Malvo's motive?
Well, again, the speculation was that he was groomed by Muhammad. He was from Jamaica, I believe. Yeah. Where he lived, and Muhammad traveled there, basically took custody of him from his mother, brought him to the United States, traveled around the United States with him, and we think just groomed him to be a participant in this thing. We don't think he had any particular motive other than to please this hero that had come into his life.
Final comments, Deane, Judge Willett?
I would just say that I have to tell my story.
Yeah.
I just say that the cooperation between the Prince William Commonwealth Attorney's Office and Police Department is always excellent. So during this case, I briefed Mr. Ebert on a regular basis. And as we turned to the prosecution part of it, we had Lieutenant Forker and others go to Virginia Beach, help with the logistics, and as Jim said, we had money. So we brought in the witnesses, Mr. Ebert and our Commonwealth Attorney's Office has always been excellent at caring for victims. These people are victims of violent crime, or they're survivors. It's very important is how we handle them. So we work closely with them to get the witnesses in town and have them reimbursed promptly and accommodations and interviews and things, and whatever. So as we, with that kind of overview, as we're getting closer to the trial, Mr. Ebert called me and said that, as Jim has mentioned, they're going to establish that the snipers operated as a team. We couldn't prove which one shot, but that the theory was that they operated as a team. And he had read this book. This is a book called The Sniper, and it's written by Mark Spicer, a Royal British Marine, I guess he was, and he was a bit of a sniper. So Paul had read that book, and he called me, and he said he'd asked the FBI, and it had been like 3 weeks after he'd asked them to try to locate this person, because he wanted to have him come as a witness, maybe, possibly. So the FBI had gone through their London Legat, and they couldn't locate Mark Spicer because of the fact he was an active sniper. They're not very careful. They're very reluctant to tell his location. So Paul called me and he said, I know you know some people in Scotland, London, whatever. Have some friends over there. Can you make any contact? I said, well, I don't know, but I'll call. So I called my friend Jim McNulty, who's former Strathclyde police officer, who happened to be, he retired at that time, but I knew Jim knew everybody. So I called Jim, and he was at Heathrow Airport, and he said, Charlie, I will call you right back. So a day or so later, he called me, and he gave me the barracks phone number for Mark Spicer. So that's the kind of thing that's happened, you know. And I don't say that to say I had so many contacts, but I say that to Paul Ebert wanted this person for a specific reason, because he wrote a book so that he could prove that the sniper case as being part of the team. The rest of the story is humorous too. Mark Spicer was the first witness in the sniper trial. And Paul interviewed Mark as the first witness. And he asked him, talking about the car, and probably something about, did he ever crawl in the car, or something, got what contact was. But he asked Mark, what do you weigh? And Mark said, 5 stones. So the jury laughed. So that just shows you how it all worked together, and how skilled Paul Ebert is in connecting with the jury and in presenting the very serious evidence that came on later.